So as not to let the facts get in our way, let's listen to what Mohammad claims Allah had to say in his perfect book. But before we do, I want you to remember that the reason for the 18th surah is that following the satanic verses, the Meccans challenged Mohammed to answer 3 questions. He was told that these questions were proposed by the Jews, and that only one who was a true prophet would know their answers. So Mohammed, isolated as he was now from his Yathrib Jewish sources and from his Yemenite Christian source, was forced to conceive surahs on his own. This is the result.
Quran 18, verse 83. They will ask you of Dhu'l-Qarnain. Say, shall I recite something of his story? Verily, we established his power on earth and gave him the ways and means to all ends. He followed a course until it reached the setting place of the sun. He found it setting in a spring of hot, black, muddy water.
Remember, Mohammed wasn't very smart, and his spirit's inspiration wasn't of any value. Earlier in the Hadith, we read that the sun set each night in a muddy spring. The Quran is verifying that truth. The Islamic scripture goes on to say,
And he found near the murky spring a people thereabout.
In an adjoining hadith, Mohammed explained that the people who lived near the sun's muddy spring setting place were extraterrestrials.
Tabari, Allah created 2 cities out in space. Were those people not so many and noisy, all the inhabitants of this world would hear the loud crash made by the sun falling when it rises and when it sets. Gabriel took me to them during my night journey from the sacred mosque,
The Kaaba,
to the farthest mosque,
the Jewish temple, which was no longer on Mount Moriah.
I told the people of these cities to worship Allah, but they refused to listen to me.
I suppose this proves that extraterrestrials are smarter than humans. So now that you know which people Alexander was visiting, and that neither Allah nor Muhammad can be trusted, we'll return to this Quranic fairy tale.
We, Allah, said by inspiration, O Dhu'l-Qarnain, either you punish them or treat them with kindness.
For a frame of reference, Allah is offering his capricious advice to Alexander the Great, as he surveys beings living around the murky spring in which the sun goes to bed at night.
Quran 18, verse 87. He said, Whoever does wrong, a disbeliever in Allah, as for him,
the extraterrestrial,
we,
Alexander the Great's troops,
shall punish. Then shall he be sent back to his Lord, and he will punish him with a terrible torture unheard of before. But as for him who believes,
in what? Alexander was a pagan.
And works good deeds, he shall have the best reward.
From whom? Alexander worshipped the sun.
And we shall speak mild words unto him.
Since the Quran opens with stories of harsh rants, followed by demented threats, and concludes with orders to mutilate and murder all who resist, he couldn't have quoted from Allah's book. And since Alexander is famous for being history's greatest warrior, it's safe to say his words were no milder than,
Punish him with a terrible torture unheard of before. Quran 18, verse 89. Then followed he another way until he came to the rising place of the sun.
And where might that be?
He found it rising on a people for whom we, Allah, had provided no covering protection against the sun. So it was, and we knew all about him,
said Professor Allah, proving the Quran wasn't inspired by a rational being. But this brings us back to Islam's poison pill, albeit more colorfully this time.
Quran 18:92. Then he followed
another
course until, when he reached
a tract
between 2 mountains, he found beneath them a people who scarcely understood a word.
Meccans, perhaps.
They said, O Dhu'l-Qarnain, verily the Gog and Magog do great mischief on earth, and they are spoiling our land.
In the previous surah, Gog was not to arrive until the last day. Now they are making mischief in a time long past. And, by the way, the Koran doesn't describe these critters as people. Quran 21:92 said,
Gog and Magog are let loose from their barrier, and they swoop down, swarming.
And that may be why these mischief makers are associated with Alexander's extraterrestrial activities. The 94th verse continues with the
people who scarcely understood a word,
saying,
shall we then pay you tribute in order that you might erect a barrier between us and them? He said that the wealth, authority, and power,
aka Islam,
in which my Lord has established me, is better than your tribute. So help me therefore with strength of men and labor. I will erect a strong barrier between you and them.
As an interesting aside, the Jewish rabbis would have known that Arabia wouldn't join in Magog's attack on Israel, and that the mischief they unleashed would spoil the land. Further, the pagan Alexander was being presented as an Islamic prophet to help validate Muhammad's claim that he, David, and Solomon were Muslims. But alas, history and archaeology affirm that Alexander was a pagan, that David and Solomon were Jews, and that Alexander didn't build a great barrier anywhere. Thus Allah is lying, something he does with great consistency. And these lies were not without consequence. Islam was based on the preposition that Abraham was a Muslim, serving Allah, as were Moses and Christ. While Muhammad's case was never believable, we now have irrefutable proof that he and his dark spirit were willing to lie in the Koran.